Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a few moments. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so kindly for joining us tonight. I am so pleased to welcome our guests for this evening, Hoa Nguyen and Elizabeth Black, in discussing 1,000 Times You Lose Your Treasure. This is an incredible collection of poetry, and I'm so excited to delve in and discuss it with you two tonight. But first, a few introductions. For those of you who are brand new here, we are Lost City Books, a used, new, and rare bookstore located in Adams, Oregon, owned by Adam, no relation, who is a veteran and dog lover, a longtime resident of DC, and an enthusiastic disseminator of books. We've got a great team of some of what I like to think of as DC's coolest kids, artists, educators, musicians, writers, and of course avid readers, all coming together to enrich this unique environment. My name is Shady Rose, and I am your host for this evening. About our author for this evening. Born in the Mekong Delta, Juan Nguyen was raised and educated in the United States and has lived in Canada since 2011. Recognized with the 2019 Neustadt International Prize for Literature nomination and Pushcart Prize, Hoa has had the privilege to work and teach all over the United States and Canada and share her unique perspective through her poetry. She is the author of several books, including As Long as Trees Last, Red Juice, poems from 1998 to 2008, and Violet Energy Ingots, which received a 2017 Griffin Prize nomination. Her fifth book of poems, 1,000 Times You Lose Your Treasure, was released in April 2021 and has garnered support from Publishers Weekly, the Poetry Foundation, Miss Magazine, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. and has also recently been longlisted for the National Book Award for poetry. So I'm very excited to offer congratulations to you on that regard. Her writing has been promoted by such outlets as Granta, Pan American Center, CBC Books, Boston Review, the Best Canadian Poetry Series, Poetry, The Walrus, and Pleiades. Oops, sorry about that, everyone. Elizabeth Black is a resident of Arlington, Virginia. She recently retired from 40 years of nursing to work on poetry and art full-time. Her passion for art, art history, different cultures, gardening, and the natural world have led her to travel the world. Although a latecomer to writing poetry, Elizabeth acknowledges her lifelong love of poetry. Her poetry has been published in Blithe Spirit, Bottle Rockets, Frog Pond, Heron's Nest, Modern Haiku, the Northern Virginia Review, and Verse Virtual. And a little bit about A Thousand Times You Lose Your Treasure. Hoa Nguyen's latest collection is a poetic meditation on historical, personal, and cultural pressures pre- and post-fall of Saigon, and comprises a verse biography of her mother, Diep An Nguyen, a stunt motorcyclist in an all-woman Vietnamese circus troupe. Multi-layered, plaintive, and provocative, the poems in A Thousand Times You Lose Your Treasure are alive with archive and inhabit histories. In turns, lyrical and unsettling, her poetry sings of language and loss, dialogues with time, myth and place, and communes with past and future ghosts. And without further ado, I would like to welcome our guest for this evening. Hello. I'm so
Thank
pleased to
you.
have you both here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Shady Rose. It's really nice to be with both of you. You are such an extraordinary host, and of course, being with Hoa Nguyen is quite an honor.
It is such a pleasure to be here for Lost City Books. I was telling Shady that it's especially important for me having grown up in the Washington, D.C. area. So it's a way of completing a kind of hometown tour of bookstores that belong to my important parts of my life.
Absolutely. And I'm so grateful that we are able to welcome you back to the DC area to celebrate your book today. I'll give a quick note to those who are watching at home. If you have any questions for our author this evening, you can type them as a comment in the comment section of the video that you're watching right there, and we'll get around to those towards the end of our event tonight. So don't be shy, go ahead and drop your questions there. In the meantime, I would love to hear if we can if I can ask you, Hua, for a bit of an overarching look at what A Thousand Times You Lose Your Treasure really is, what it meant to you to be writing, and how these poems came together and to form a collection.
Yeah, I mean, these are this work is actually something that I've thought about for a long time. The story of my mother's life is a compelling one. The book itself includes, as the introduction suggests, this biography in verse, and it also includes a gallery of photographs from my mother's circus performing days. So this very sort of compelling life story, which contained sort of the features of great story, right? A person with sort of extra human qualities in extraordinary times, living their life in a very sort of experimental and wayward manner, and the impulse really was inspired by a desire to center not just my mother's story, but stories like hers that are in contrast to or contest images that are more monolithic of women of my mother's generation, women of Vietnamese diasporic origins. Typically, they're not assigned a story at all or a name. If they appear at all, it might be as a victim. It might be maybe a villain who needs to be saved. and so on. And I wanted to be able to feature a complexity of what it meant, what it means, what it looks like, the features of the Vietnamese diasporic experience, with poems that could bear witness to historical violence and tremendous events of loss and displacement, alongside other features and complexities, emotions of triumph and joy. And of course, this inspiration of my mother's celebrated stunt motorcycle life is quite interesting and glamorous, as also I enter into the story as a character, the mixed race child, who's born in Vietnam, but then leaves with her mother, and they don't return back together, right? So, and then to tell it as poetry, right? I didn't want to write an essay or a short story. I was interested in the particular kinds of sonic environments that poetry allows, that evoke both atmosphere, emotions, emotional correlations, but that also attempt to document.
One of the things I found most compelling about the book is that it felt like a tapestry or a collage of different kinds of poems. And so you have prose, and you have lyric, and you have sonnets, and then you have snippets from a newspaper and Vogue magazine, and teachings about language, and it all kind of feeds into the body of the work to celebrate your mother. The different types of poems give context and kind of hold your mother and put her in a setting. And I just thought it was lovely what you did, and quite wonderful, and quite a tribute to your mother.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a difficult book to write. The poems had to also act as a way out of silence and silencing, which is a lot of the experience of intergenerational trauma, of traumatic diasporic circumstance, and then circumstance of the violence from of a very violent war in Vietnam at the time. And the violence of colonialism, right? But that there's room for those difficulties inside of the space of the poems that also can include things like ghosts and humor, and, as you say, these sort of archival remnants and stories.
Yeah, and I love the inclusion of photographs. I thought, particularly as coming from the artist part of me, I thought the photographs fed the poems, and the poems fed the photographs. And you refer to the photographs in at least one of the poems, when I think you're actually in a dialogue with your mother, and you're asking her, who are these women, and these 5 women in a photograph. And it's quite a tragic poem.
Yeah, it's tonally casual, and associative, which I think amplifies the emotional sort of delivery system, of the content. Yeah. That's a sonnet. As you said, I do also include different kinds of form. Well, maybe this would be a good time maybe to read a couple of pieces, and we can always circle back to more questions. And also, if Shady, if there are any questions in the chat on the live stream that you wanted to share in our chat in this room, I can see it. But I thought I would open with the opening poem. And it's a poem that's called Seeds and Crumbs. I was thinking about the word diaspora, which means, to scatter, as though with seeds. And I was thinking about that, sort of what's left, after a diaspora that's marked by a particularly shocking set of circumstances. Seeds and Crumbs. Yes, a famous mise en scène. When I was just a little girl, Angle looks too much like Angel, and vice versa. What lies ahead? Rainbows. Rainbow. Who cares? Scatter the song. Clavichord it. The future's not ours to see. Tenderly. This next poem I'm going to read actually takes its source from a language book called Colloquial Vietnamese. There's a couple of poems that draw a frame around found text. Language points from Colloquial Vietnamese. Word order for toy. With chi, toy often means only. He only studies. I can speak Vietnamese only a little. That's it. I will not talk anymore. Expressing ability. To do. To go. I can speak Vietnamese. I am able to speak Vietnamese. I am unable to do it. I am unable to go. Singing and song comes up a lot, I think, is an expressive mode. And also, obviously to honor the intimate link between poetry and music, which, is really a kind of joint origin. So this one is called Autonomous Song. Mm-hmm. Refusing the motherland mother role, Delta girl, plotting a runaway plot, no waiting in shadows life for us, her love of colonial electric lights, motorbikes, cursed roses, Christmas, the handsome singing of Que Sara, Sara, barren thorns to plunge, bouncing light spills on the butterfly lovers of Chinese legend, a frenzy of magenta flowers to devour. This poem is one of the sort of biography and verse poems, and this one details how my mother first met her fate, or a fate, I should say. It's called The Flying Motorist Artist. Yes, how she met a fate. At 12, Diep didn't have a half-cent entrance fee to see the circus performance. When she was 12, 3 motorcycle performers traveled from Thailand to Canta. I thought they were from the Philippines. No, Thailand. A motorcycle act that came to her province in the lower Mekong Delta, joining a country fair for the new year, 1954. Everywhere we came to see displays of snakes, contortionists, fortune tellers, to exchange caged birds. She, the disobey, Diep, done with farm chores, washing clothes, seeing to chickens, but never the kitchen. She made things burn or break, they said. Spilled rice in the dirt, bad luck, they said, and banned her. Recall that one seer and her mad possession, spirits in the belly, suddenly enlarged, round and hard. When she saw the palm reader, they made tell of a sailboat. Come see the flying motorist artist, riding shadows on the wall of death, riding shadows on the wall of death. Watch them defy death on the wall of death. Danger, perpendicular, their reaching hands, 2 men, a lone woman riding her name, loud and loud and loud, motorbike flying. The wooden wall roars. And yeah, that's a reference to the motorbike trick that she could perform in a pair or in solo, where she was perpendicular on a wooden wall that they called the wall of death or the barrel. But it's the story of actually how she saw this act when she was 12, just happened to come to a fair near her house. And she thought to herself, I want to be as famous as that. And then she had the opportunity later when she was a teenager, and she ran away from home and joined the circus. But meanwhile, Napalm notes, developed in secret at Harvard, produced by Dow Chemical, an efficient incendiary formula perfected on Valentine's Day, 1942. A thickened gasoline can be dropped from planes, napalm bombs, also flamethrowers. 8 million tons of bombs in Vietnam burns at 1,500 to 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit, 1/5 as hot as the surface of the sun. Very sticky, stable, also relatively cheap. I'll keep going.
I'd love to just comment because they're so wonderful. And like, there's just the last one about Dow Chemical, and that without mentioning the Vietnam War in the poem, you bring reference to the horrors of the war through Dow Chemical that also made saran wrap to keep leftovers and develops this napalm to destroy a country and the people and the land. And then the language and the music that repeatedly comes into your poems is so amazing. You'll have to sing it again, because when I was once a little girl, and then Que Sera, Sera comes in, and the French also, I mean, it just reminds me of the colonialism that Vietnam also endured, and before the Americans come in, and
yeah, it was Napoleon's idea, Indochine. Well, of course it was, they would bring in the churches first. It was the same sort of
Jesuits.
It's a program of the idea that brown people need to be civilized and also are exploitable. And so that was like it's a long history of conflict. And I was interested in the women's stories because they tend not to be told, in particular. So that while that obviously are like parts of the fabric and the fact, so many stories are happening in these acts of lives that are important to narrate. Also as a way to give expression that allows them to live and have a future. That I'm interested in poems as a place to also world, to help forms of release.
And the uniqueness of your mother being really non-traditional Vietnamese woman, and yet here's Vietnam motherland, and then mother, and this exploration of who your mother is. And here she is in this wild woman motorcycle circus act, very dangerous. And one of your poems, where she leaves home and joins the troupe, and she has to do that. She does all her practices barefoot, and it just the details that you put into the poems makes the reader fall in love with your mother as you, and it felt like you are learning and coming to know your mother in a very deep way, and also coming to know yourself in the Vietnamese diaspora, and this community holding you as you search for yourself and mother.
Oh, thank you. It did feel like that, actually. I think that's one of the reasons why it was so, it took me a long time. You know, this is my fifth book. And, you know, I've had people say, like, I can't believe you haven't written about this explicitly. I mean, there are poems that have addressed this material, but not in this kind of narrative shape, you know, that I made around the material. But thank you.
Something that reminds me of too is the way that throughout the book, and especially through the poems that you just read, your poetry manages to inject both a directness about it. You know, you can tell where these details are coming from and how raw and specific they are, at the same time as being wrapped in subtlety. You know, the last poem you read, and its discussion about napalm ending with and it's also cheap, you know, is such a hard hitting truth that also is delivered with sort of almost casual grace and subtlety. And I noticed that throughout a lot of your poems in this book. And my question is, what does the work look like for you as a poet to marry both these intense details, these intense truths, with that grace and subtlety that comes through in your form and in your word choice?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, for me, because this was such a personal book, it was a lot of writing and then setting it aside for about 5 years, writing a different book in between, declaring that it would never be written, you know. It required that I go to Vietnam. It was deeply precipitated by connections with the diasporic Vietnamese Anglophone community of writers, and who also are women or non-binary writers, and getting together with them, and the support around the foundation of Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network, which is acronym is DVAN. Has been instrumental. I think it was particularly personally difficult being also someone who's monolingual. My mother, as Elizabeth you mentioned, was very modern. I mean, modern for her generation, like peers in the U.S. even. You know, she didn't marry even though she had children, you know, in the early 60s. Like that was not something that was done. It was quite shameful. You know, I even now would be a little bit of a radical act to be a young woman unmarried with children, right? And your own boss. And so the metaphor that I use in the book is connected to her birth year, which she was born in the year of the silver snake. And so her great achievements in life, her great skill was transformation, just like her sign, her snakeness. But it's very convulsive and painful to transform, right? I mean, metaphorically, to shed your skin. And it was very complete in my mother's case. And so that there were things that didn't transfer, both also out of her own protectionism. The silence that I referred to is pretty complete. And, comparing notes with other children who are first generation of a diaspora that's marked by great violence, say like friends whose parents survived the Holocaust, that there's a great silence, because there's survivor's guilt, there's trauma from the circumstances. And so the recovery or the reclamation was a difficult thing. And I would turn to form sometimes to help lean into one of my mentors, Anne Waldman, who's written this incredible epic called Iovis. And I asked her, how do you sustain verse across a space and tell a story? And she said for her, it was an image like out of Dante, the Imago. So I was like, that was enough. It was like, if I could have like an image that would appear to me, but it took a while for it to appear. So I also turned to things like chance operations. So the I Ching, which is a divinatory system that I've long been engaged with, and just in a kind of curious way, and provided the title, and also provided the image, which is the image of shock, which is not unlike like the image in the tarot, the tower, when the lightning's being struck. So the tower also became an image, and I received a tarot reading where the tower figured in it right before I was leaving to return to Vietnam for the first time, without my mother. But then my mother was still alive then, so I was like reporting to her about it. And then also while I was there, I just happened to encounter the motorcycle stunt trick being performed in a public park in Hanoi, because it was the big holiday, which is Tet. And so, and then I realized the structure of the barrel in which she performed her tricks in looks like a tower. So then the tower took on a new sort of sense of articulation. And of course there's language, like with the myth of the Tower of Babel, and the language itself sort of betraying one or colliding in different ways with sort of calamities. Yeah.
You talk about language a lot in the poems, even as like Ma, you use that idea, and using language as asking questions, like learn to speak Vietnamese, and then you have these questions that are posed, but they're not just any questions, they're intrusive questions for a non-Vietnamese to learn Vietnamese. And so it kind of hits the reader.
Mm. Yeah, language itself becomes part of the conversation.
Yeah, it's almost a theme that runs through.
Mm-hmm.
Something that you've both said kind of strikes up a question for me, and we have a couple from the viewers as well to get to. But that use of language and creates a definite sense of mysticism throughout the poems that connects them even across form. And you did speak a little bit just then about divination, and I wonder if you have any insights into your thoughts about how you've used the words and how you arrange your words, and how that does tend to create almost a spell-like quality to the poems that enhances that feeling of mystic connections to the moments that are being shared in the poems. If you have thoughts about that.
Yeah, I've long been fascinated with poetry's also use as in chant and ritual, in prayer, and things that to invoke the dead, to memorialize, often with rhythms that are rhythms of attention, rhythms that gather narrative, the meaningful narrative to share, to retain. And so, and in those ways in which the tarot or the I Ching is a kind of interaction with sort of like these big kinds of themes, archetypes, if you will, the elemental things of one's life, the dramas and conflicts and questions, and how the things that we turn to that are poetic languages to find answers are a way to continue like a kind of dialogue across time, right? Like the I Ching is a very old book, for example, right? And I think, and poetry is very old and very durable, right? And part of its durability is that is the way that I think that it interacts with this invention that we have of language, which is one of our, I think it's the most incredible invention that we have, right? It plays, it means, it makes, and I think it can help one preserve a place in the future, like as a form of healing. So that's a kind of magic, I think. All of those things really are.
I know that the hexagram 51 is the one you chose, and I had to look it up. And it's a wonderful story how you came to the title of the book and how important having that hexagram seemed to be for you. I don't know if you can comment on that.
Yeah, it was, I had set myself aside some time. It was the first time I'd ever had like a devoted period of time where I could just write. I had always had a job or commitments at home that would prevent doing something where that I could just do my art for weeks on end. And I knew that this book would probably require those forms of commitments and attention. And so, but the first, and I brought my I Ching book with me, the Book of Changes, and I asked about starting this series, and I drew through the randomization of coin tossing, the hexagram Chen, thunder, double thunder, thunder over thunder, which is shock, shock thunder, and it's actually it's a little bit like getting struck by lightning. It's a little bit it's a kind of generative chaos, which is also the meaning of the Tower card, as I mentioned later. But not only did I draw it the one time, I drew it consecutively 3 times. I think it was 3. I actually stopped because I was starting to feel a sense of uncanniness around it, and I also decided that I had heard the message, and I needed to spend some thinking like, why shock? And then of course I was like, well, of course, like I was born literally near the height of the conflict of the American War. It was like a year before the Tet Offensive, which is a particular marker in time. Anyway, so and that shock was a theme, and I think in many forms in my mother's life, and a transformative form, but also a difficult one to work with, because you're having to innovate and mutate, right, to address that kind of fate, right, of shock.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And look where it led you.
Yeah, this is my form of kind of transmutation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. A few from our viewers here. One says, "Beautiful, thank you for reading. Can you tell us more about how these different forms best served their individual subjects with the poems?"
Yeah, well, there's that handy saying that poets have from Robert Crayley, who says, that form is nothing more than an extension of content. I think for me, form has also been like a container that I could use as a structure to contain sort of my ambitions for the poem, without having to necessarily overthink it, right? Because you already have the form, and you can just sort of, you can make the strategic gestures like to fill out the sonnet form. But I think that more than form is, I think of like a kind of overarching poetics maybe is also where I begin, which has to do with the attentions to sound. I mean, sonnets are handy because they're sort of tight and they're formal and they have constraints. And yet part of the pleasure is that you can push the form and make it do different things. You're also talking across time. It's also a little song, you know, so it retains the sort of call to musicality. Other kinds of forms, the notes, like the napalm notes form, that's a kind of very sort of formal or dry set of strategies, right? Where, and I find that can be a useful space to contain particularly difficult information, right? So that it tonally interacts. So it's sort of about finding the right fit. A lot of it's by feel.
Thank you. This next one is not exactly a question, but Elizabeth says, during my 6 years in Hanoi, I loved watching women on motorbikes. A toddler in the lap, 2 or 3 other children in the back seat, zoomed by me, and I shook in my flip-flops. Thank you for celebrating a woman on the motorbike in words and in picture.
That's great.
Excellent. Yeah, it is. It's always an incredible sight to see the families aboard the bikes with the things you need, you know, stacked very confidently.
Children in front and back, and people stretching on the bike.
And we also have John who says, did your mother see her life or herself as remarkable?
Oh, that's such a great question. She actually, you know, she knew her worth, and she was tough and really smart, but she didn't have a ton of opportunities. She made the most of the opportunities that she had. She didn't like to talk about the motorcycle stuff. I think because of, you know, the traumas of the times that she suffered, that she triumphed inside of also. But, you know, that's a hard thing. You gotta leave family, you know, behind. So, and she would say that was a long time ago, you know, and didn't really want to talk about it. But she knew that it was pretty outstanding, but she was pretty modest, actually. It's sort of in the way that badasses, like the most badasses, are modest, you know? Yeah, she's fabulous like that.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
There was one thing I read when reading up for this, and it was a comment that your mother had said to you before she died, and about how you had come to know her better, or you remember her better than she remembered herself. And
Yeah.
I thought, isn't that something that you could?
Yeah, I think I was always the rememberer, the family, you know, how there are certain people who remember everything. I was always sort of that one. But yeah, I think I was always keen to understand her experiences, because I knew that there would be an essential disconnection via language, via place, via context. And so I would take note whenever she was willing to talk about Vietnam. Her later years, she was pretty ill and it was difficult. One of the gifts was that I spent a lot of time with her to help her through the prolonged illness. And more stories sort of arrived in these sort of long, unhurried, you know, time segments, which was a beautiful gift for sure.
Well, I wish your mother could, or I'm sure she is present, and so happy for you for.
No. I would love if you would share some of your poetry, Elizabeth. If this would be a good time to do so. I don't.
Sure. I know people are so thrilled to have you, so I'm happy to and honored to. I can tell you that there are strong influences in my poetry. So and this will come through the natural world and art. You know, my background is in the fine arts and painting and music. And so that plays a really important part. And because I have lived in the Washington area and worked in developing countries in healthcare. So the politics of Washington come into my poetry, and different cultures come into my poetry. One of the first poems I chose was takes place in the month of September because it's this peak bird migration. And in particular, the chimney swifts are migrating this week under the full moon, the harvest moon, which is out there right now. I'm looking for it. It rained all day and then the skies cleared up. So the moon is out there. I just don't see it from where I am. This is called Twilight in the Company of Others. Late September, I watch chimney swifts gather, scatter, regather, in ever greater numbers to soar and dart in all directions against the giant autumn sky. Each return brings a greater mass of swifts, more than 1,000 swarm, circling counterclockwise. In choreographed precision, whirl the opposite direction, disappear as mist like a drifting cloud. In the evening world of orange and pink, summoned by biology, return, flying round and round, darkening the sky in an ever tighter circle, wild and ecstatic, mystic dervish dancers whirling faster and faster until they funnel and drop into the old trash chimney. One pairs and more descend too fast for my eyes to follow until not a single swift remains in the sky, and I am left alone with the full moon blazing somewhere outside there to walk home, my shadow following. You know that I'm a painter and I love art, and the next poem is an emphatic poem based on a painting by Alma Thomas. And for those who don't know who Alma Thomas is, she's an African-American painter, now deceased, not so long ago. She was born and raised in Washington, D.C., so she's very dear to me. And she was the first African-American female artist to exhibit in the White House under the Obama administration, and also the first African-American woman to have a one-woman show at the Whitney. So I'm a great admirer of her. This is Tiptoe Through the Tulips. It's the name of the painting. She defines her lines by those around it, incomplete sentences, written in vibrant color of pansy and tulip. Her diction of spondine sequences, bright reds by best blues, by bold purples, accented, hot and cold hues, compete as she meters her rows of fragmented flowers, patterned dashes of uneven stitches, measured in sameness by the size of her canvas. As her eyes dart down and up, bringing to focus her poem's exuberant rhythm, pausing with the short breathers thank God of white gesso. For those who know me, the natural world is my major teacher. It gives me a sense of who I am and my place in the world. And this is a poem I wrote this week. So I have a tendency to write poems that I've just written. So they probably may be edited down the line. So take that, hear that. Flight of the maple seeds. Against the furrowed pattern of April maple trees, our eyes ride the dizzying flight of feathered seeds, twirling free of branches, lifted skyward, winged dancers, spiraling, perennial present, like love, as it was in the beginning, seeds of something real, something capable of going on forever. So it kind of captures for me the cyclic nature of life and nature I love and nature that loves me back. But I'm not all Pollyannish. So most of my siblings and nephews and nieces are married to non-Caucasian Americans. And one brother married to an Ethiopian. So this poem is really about what's going on in Ethiopia at this time. It's called Atrocities. Corpses pile up in Tigray as millions flee flies and hunger, risking death or worse. Women carry on bony hips and backs scraps of children and home, escape the last house-to-house cleanse of history, swept instead into Sudan's dusty camps, displaced to scratch a living, fed turmoil, fed atrocity, purged of aid, not yet cold. I was telling Sadie Rose, and you too also, that my husband, John, and I just recently moved from Arlington to the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, which is really beautiful, but the move was traumatic in the midst of pandemic and coming after 4 years of Trump. Anyway, it was chaotic, and his poem is called Lost Moving. I pack my history in cardboard boxes, label them for the goodwill of someone I'll never know. I feel light, like death is close, as though I could float past clouds, like a kite tethered to a frayed string, ready to snap free, lift to the ever after. I am on the edge, sitting on an open box of books. I could fall inside, unnoticed, lost between the yellowed syllables of Tolstoy and Dickens, or picture pages of Picasso and the Edo Kingdom, or the earmarked volumes of tree and bird identification. I must refine my identity, reclassify my human taxonomy. Kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, order Primates, family Hominidae, genus Homo, species Homo sapien, beyond sapien, who am I? I don't know how our time is, but
Thank you for sharing those.
yeah.
We have a few more minutes left. I'd like to encourage our viewers to drop any more questions they might have in the chat for now. But in the meantime, I'd like to hear both of your thoughts on, especially now having heard some of each other's poetry and also having had the opportunity to read 1,000 Times You Lose Your Treasure. Um, because A Thousand Times is such a deeply personal and sort of personal history type of collection, I wonder if, for you, Elizabeth, if you noted moments as you were reading this that felt very personal to you as well, and why, if you noticed other readers kind of returning with um, a particularly intimate and personal connection as well.
Of Ha's poems.
Yes, towards the poems. And
So yes, I think something for me that spoke in the poems was you mentioned a Vietnamese musician in one of your poems. Probably, if I can think of his name, it's skipping me, but he wrote this, the one of the last lines of one of your poems about stones, and to me it spoke of relationship, and that's how I felt. Almost, it kind of summed up the poem, or this collection of multiple modalities of poems as a single poem telling a story, but about relationship. And darn if I can't find it. I have pages of notes here.
I think the singer is Tring Kang San.
Yes.
And yeah, he was a singer-songwriter from central Vietnam, Hue, and he was known as sort of the singer-songwriter. The West would say the Bob Dylan, because he also it was like love songs, but they were also, they weren't apolitical. But they weren't in service to propaganda either, and so people connected a lot to him. So it's a really, the song lyrics. There's a couple of his songs that I sample in the poems that have. I think the line was, "In the future, even stones will need each other."
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which I also like as a kind of line of divination. Also, it's like a prediction.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
thank you. Lastly, we have just a little bit of time left. I'd love to give both of you the opportunity to let our viewers know where they can keep up with your work and what they can expect to see happening next with you as a poet.
Well, Ha, speak up, because I am quite an isolationist.
Yes, and you just arrived after a difficult move. I have a feeling you'll be going through those boxes. I liked in that poem how that was that theme of categorization and sort of the unpacking, which is not unlike archive. Archive is sort of like what's retained as the record. So that you'll be interacting with like the record of the time. I've been thinking a lot about time. I'm going to be leading a workshop for the poetry project called Time Experiments in November. I think I'm going to be proposed to do another short workshop actually for the Strathmore House, which is near where I grew up. In Montgomery County, Maryland. And so that's kind of exciting, sort of a full circle moment to teach a poetry writing workshop when, as I was a kid, I would fly a kite at the fields where there are now townhouses. It was just fields there. And it had just been, I think it had been a convent, and it was empty, and it was our sledding hill, so it's I'm looking forward to that. And then my book, A Thousand Times You Lose Your Treasure, is on this long list. And I guess that is a really great thing to celebrate, and hopefully more things to celebrate around the book. Thank you so much. This has been such a warm and lovely occasion. I really appreciate the invitation. I wish I could be there in person.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Shady, and thank you, Ha, so much. It has been well.
Thank you both so much. Yes, this has been a great conversation, and I am in such deep love with this book. As you can see, I've got my own set of.
These are my markers.
Oh.
These are my favorite poems, all 54 or whatever.
And so, for those of you watching at home, if you don't already have your copy yet, you can come into Lost City Books at any time, and we still have more, and we'll continue to have 1,000 Times You Lose Your Treasure on our shelves. And thank you both for joining us tonight. This has been an exquisite pleasure, and it's been an honor to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Same to you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.